morning. This is Dr. Lori Baudino, and I'm doing collaborative check-ins today with Dr. Jamie Chaves and Dr. Ashley Taylor. And they've got an incredible new book called The Why Behind Classroom Behaviors. It's for pre-K to 5, and it's integrative strategies for learning, regulation, and relationships. And I'm hoping those of you that are watching this are educators or school therapists or working in the academic setting with children, and even parents to kind of understand what's behind all these behaviors. So thank you both for coming and talking with me today. Tell us more about your book.
So we have a couple of unique things about our book. One of the things is we talk a lot about integration in the book, brain integration amongst all of the professionals who are in the school environment. And one of the things that makes us unique in terms of integration is that I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, and Dr. Taylor is a pediatric psychologist. And so we are coming at the book from an integrated strategy as well, so that we could put both of our understanding of children's behaviors together and integrate that information.
Yeah, it's so important. I know both of you know my work as well, and just understanding that bottom up and top down approach and what's underneath those behaviors that are going on. Will you tell us some of the maybe strategies or ideas behind these behaviors that can support these children?
Sure. So, interestingly, we started writing this book long before any, concerns of COVID or coronavirus or global pandemics were on the radar. And now, we feel like the book and the strategies that we talk about are even more relevant than ever. Teachers and educators and students are in such a really crisis mode right now, and we don't know what the future is going to look like. And so we really hope that our book and the strategies that we talk about can be used not only for students, but also for teachers. We try to take a really holistic approach in our book. So it's not only for supporting the students, but we also talk a lot about how we can support our teachers. Jamie, Dr. Chaves, and I have worked a lot in schools throughout our careers, and we've really seen how hard teachers and educators are working and trying and, just doing their best to survive and support their students. And we've seen how draining it is for them. And so our hope is that our book can really begin to open the dialogue on how we can support the teachers so that we can ultimately support students as well. We talk a lot about ways to help teachers identify regulation in themselves. There's a lot of reflective and experiential activities to help teachers with that, and then also applying it to their work with the students to help identify states of regulation in their students. We talk about something called the teacher-student dyad, which is a really sort of interesting bridge from the parent-child dyad to the teacher-student dyad. And then we, as Dr. Chaves was talking about, integrate a lot of the sensory motor regulation strategies into helping build an awareness into what might be underlying the behaviors that we're seeing at school.
That's so helpful. Also had experience with teachers who, they are always have these great intentions, and they go in with the students and they're saying, well, like, I'm feeling like I'm a rocky place just being with the children, like I'm on edge, and thinking about how important it is to get them to feel safe and secure in order to be able to be their best selves for their children. So, and oftentimes, no fault of their own, but they might not have had that education early on, really focusing on academic learning. And so what you're offering is more than academic learning, but this whole, as you mentioned, holistic approach of what regulation even looks like, which is so essential to working with children. Mental health, learning about the regulation piece is imperative for working with our children.
And we really wanted to include specialty classes, teachers of specialty classes, art and PE and music, and lunch aides and recess aides because they're often left out of the conversation. And we feel that they play a hugely integral part of understanding students' behaviors. Students who may be thriving in their classes but struggling in other classes.
Right.
Students who may be struggling in their classes but thriving in other classes, and how their observations and insights really contribute to understanding holistically how the child is doing at school.
Right. Yeah, I've had a lot of kids that maybe that transition into that specialty class might be difficult because they're not as familiar with that teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it seems like it's, a behavior that the child's, being labeled as inappropriate or getting sent to the principal, when really it's about building that, like you mentioned, Dr. Taylor, that teacher-child bond and that relationship and knowing the intricacies of these children. So do you have information that you share with educators about kind of how to see a behavior as kind of looking underneath the behavior and seeing it less of a behavior, more of a sensory or stress response?
Exactly. Yeah. So we talk a lot about sort of being curious and asking questions and knowing what types of questions to ask to figure out what is the child trying to communicate to me through this behavior. And I think, we while a lot of times the students who are acting out and who, may be sort of considered disruptive or their behaviors are impacting the other students in the classroom, a lot of times those students get identified, but we also focus on students who are going more internal. So a lot of times the children who are not having sort of the overt behaviors, they need a lot of help too. And so we focus on all different types and states of regulation, and helping teachers to build an awareness and an understanding of that, and then knowing what types of questions to ask to figure out what is this child communicating to me right now? How can I fill whatever that need is that the child is expressing through their behavior, and use the, we talk a lot about co-regulation between the teacher and the student. How can they use the co-regulatory relationship, that ability to be regulated together? How can they use that to build the sense of safety in the classroom, which will ultimately increase the student's ability to learn?
Absolutely. That's wonderful.
And I would piggyback off of that, just a couple points. One is that we say to teachers, it's okay not to know all of the answers.
Right.
And that's the thing that you need to do, is just start asking questions and being curious, continuing to come from a place of understanding rather than jumping to conclusions or assumptions. And that in not knowing all of the answers, most teachers have a really good support team around them in the school, and there are other resources that they can tap into in terms of reaching out to therapists within the school environment who might be able to help support some of the students where teachers really feel like it's kind of out of their league. And another thing, in addition to teachers asking questions, we also talk about teachers helping students to ask those questions as well, so that students are better understanding their own brains, their own regulation, understanding their unique differences from classmates, and how we all have different sensory preferences, we all have different temperaments, we all have different interests, and that's okay. That's how we learn to navigate the world and what makes us operate as a community. We can hold each other up in our strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, and just allowing, I'm hearing how important that is to allow the child to know that there's nothing wrong with them, that we all have these very special, unique ways of learning and being together. And that alone just relieves a lot of the stress and those those stress responses. Dr. Taylor, you were talking about right now during COVID. Now a lot of us, I'm a mom as well, and just that a lot of us are becoming our own teachers to our children as well, with balancing homeschooling, even if it's virtual. And as we're getting into your book, I know how important that learning about regulation is for even parents to understand. So I'm imagining we're wearing multiple hats now of teacher, parent, and distinguishing that.
Right. I know yeah, I'm a parent too. So it's quite the balancing act of figuring out how, so now we're parents, we've got to do all the amazing things that teachers do, and, balance, just everything. And it's a lot. And, I've talked to so many parents in the last few weeks who have this newfound respect for teachers, and like, I had no idea what all of our teachers were doing all these years. It's amazing. And so I think that it's true. Teachers are amazing, and now they have even more to deal with. And so I think, the concepts in our book, they can be applied to distance learning. And like we were saying, it's even more important now than ever to really focus, because in the last however many months it's been, 3 since March, since the original shutdown, I guess, children have been going through very stressful and, probably traumatic at times experiences. Anxiety and depression have increased. And so as we head into this school year, it's going to be more important to really be aware of and sensitive to how that is going to impact behavior, and really knowing that, whatever behaviors we see, whether they're, withdrawn, shut down, isolating, or acting out, yelling, disruptive behaviors, that we really want to understand, where is this coming from? They're not trying to be, manipulative. They're not trying to get attention. It's coming from a place of dysregulation, maybe fear, and we talk about other sources of that in our book. And so for teachers as well, I think for us as parents as well, we've all been in this sort of heightened state of stress. And so we're really all going to have to come together and work on that co-regulation to get through this time.
Yeah, I love how, I tend to get like a little smile on my face when challenges present themselves, not because I wish them upon anyone than our children, but just how brilliant our children are, that they have these adaptive responses. And so they'll kind of present this parallel process to what they're going through. And that if those behaviors show up, it's like, wow, yeah, you're asking for some support here. Thank you. Like, what if we came to it and said, thank you. I'm curious, like you're saying, I'm curious, I'm wanting to know more, because we can see it. And I did want to circle back. I truly value also your representation of the child who is more reserved or kind of withdrawn, because I think so often in schools, we tend to focus, and parents in our community tend to focus on the loud, the ones that you can really see. And I've always really been interested in also the children that are kind of under the radar, and making sure that they're also being seen, and that the behaviors can look different, but they're still equally as important. And they are, non-verbally communicating a lot in that, the pullback, in the, kind of not being a part of the group. It's great to hear that you're also giving teachers those tools to understand those children as well.
We talk a lot and we focus a lot on what's impacting learning. And, from what we know, when we talk about the brain and how we need to get into a receptive state in order for the students to be able to learn. And so if we see a child who's withdrawing or not engaging, that's also impacting their learning. So we need to look at both of those pieces.
Yeah. So as parents are looking and educators are looking to get this book, what are some of the questions they might be asking to learn more for their children?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that we really encourage, is just asking questions and continuing to ask questions about behavior. So some of the questions that I would ask, coming from a OT perspective: how did the child sleep last night, or even 2 nights or 3 nights before? What has the child eaten so far that day? Quantity and quality of what they've eaten. What are some of the sensory processing concerns that a child might have. Is there too much noise in the classroom? Is there too much visual stimulation on the walls? Have they not received enough physical activity? Are they needing, or are they retracting from some of the tactile experiences that are in the classroom? Also looking at handwriting, motor skills, fine motor skills, which are also related to sensory processing that we talk about in the book, but how are motor skills impacting their function in the classroom, and how is that impacting them in PE class and music class when they have to move their fingers on instruments, and outside at recess when kids are wanting to play active games with them, and they might not feel the confidence to do that around other peers. And those relationships at recess are going to impact how they understand themselves and feel about themselves, which is going to impact how they learn and pay attention as well.
Yeah, so you're calling on teachers to really look, like you mentioned earlier, not just to assume or to label, but really looking at what is the body showing? What are you seeing in their posture and their response to their environment? And these are some really important areas to think about. Are there other questions that educators should be thinking about as they're working with children?
I think in addition to that, thinking about their, maybe previous experiences with learning. Have they been positive? Have they been challenging? Maybe being curious about what type of learner they are. Do they need to move to learn, or can they, sit and listen and take it in, or do they need to see it or hear it? And then also, if possible, I know it's hard when you've got a big class of a lot of students, but knowing a little bit about their histories as well. We have a lot of sort of vignettes and examples in our book that help to explore this a little bit more. But kids that may come from different backgrounds, may have different experiences, sort of relating socially, their relationships with learning and academics as well.
Yeah. It really is such a comprehensive view of understanding that learning just doesn't happen in that moment for that child, but there is this whole life experiences that lead up to it, and then the whole experience inside their body, outside of their body, in relationship to all the situations that they're coming across. And it does sound like, when you're saying that, I'm thinking of a quick response of someone being like, well, we don't have time for that. And I'm imagining we don't have to have all the answers in one moment. We can kind of find them over time, but just to be able to come to the academic setting with these questions would just be a great place to start.
I would also say another question that we really posit to teachers is asking how their regulation and how their relationships, past or current, might be influencing how they are interacting with students, and how their regulation is impacting the regulation of students in the classroom. So also understanding from a teacher's point of view that it's not always the student who, like, the students are responding to us as adults. They look to us as adults and they feel our emotions as well. So also just thinking about, again, teachers, how can we support you to get you to a better state of regulation? How can we find people that will be in your corner and supporting you relationally so that you can positively influence the regulation and relationships of the students in the classroom?
Yeah, so one thing we talk a little bit about is what you were saying is that students absorb what we feel, and we can also absorb what they feel. And so, this idea of vicarious trauma, I think right now, especially with everyone coming into the new school year with this heightened sort of nervous system arousal, it's going to be really hard for that not to sort of bounce off each other. My stress is going to bounce off of you, and yours is going to bounce off of me. And so, one of the strategies we talk about in the book is let's try to be a mirror and not a sponge. And so we're trying not, notice if we're absorbing people's emotions and states of regulation from around us. And instead of trying to absorb it, try to reflect it back. And so we talk a little bit about how to do that. Another strategy we talk about is, so when we don't know what to do and we see a child who's having a hard time and we want to help them, but we might not know in the moment, we might feel flustered and a little bit dysregulated ourselves. One of the strategies we suggest is, when in doubt, describe. Just describe what you see happening in front of you. Sometimes that gives you enough of a moment to regulate yourself and then figure out what to do next.
Yeah, and come into the here and now, because then you're starting to really see what's happening. So thank you both so much for sharing about this book and your work. I know it will be such a great asset to so many educators and, as we're mentioning, and our parents out there. Where can we find your book?
It's available on the Corwin website, CORWIN. It's also available on Amazon as well. And it's being released in September, but pre-sales are happening right now.
Wonderful. Thank you again for being here, and I look forward to all of us reading and learning from your book. So thank you again.
Thank you for having us.